Goodbye. Hello, Heisman.
20, 25, 30, 35, 40, 45, 50, 45. There goes Davis. Oh, my God. Davis is going to run it all the way back. Auburn's going to win the football game.
They give it back now to the 30. They're down to the 20. All the Bailey is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone.
Four-man Alabama rush. Got him. Oh, no, they didn't. Oh, my gracious.
Yep.
How about that?
Welcome back, everybody. Another edition of the Three Technique, a college football podcast at the intersection of the X's and O's and the Jimmies and the Joes. I'm Mitch Mason, Trey Reeves, Garrett Turney joining us. This is part 2 of our SEC preview series. If you missed part 1, we did teams 16 through 11 as power ranked by you, the listener. You can head on over and check that out either before this or after this one, Spotify, Apple, YouTube, wherever you get your content. We are at 3 Tech Pod. We'd love to have you along for the ride. And guys, we wanted to add kind of some framework for this middle tier, especially. The SEC is a deep conference. I think we're going to get into that with the Big 12, maybe for different reasons, more chaos, I think, in the Big 12. But in the SEC, there's always a team, it feels like, that comes from this middle tier, the mid-pack, and jumps up and has a great year, right? It's been Ole Miss, it's been Arkansas. Folks are waiting on maybe Auburn this year to take the next step. When does Texas A&M realize all of their potential? And so as we were thinking about how we could contextualize this episode for you, the viewer, Trey, we came up with an interesting seasonal element, and I'll let you take that away without any further ado.
Yeah, these are the swing states, and we're in an election year, and so it's very appropriate with all the just craziness that's happening. These are the swing states. They could decide the conference race one way or the other based on how good these teams are. One will be in the top 4. I can almost guarantee that one of these teams that we talk about today will be in the top 4 in the conference. I can probably also guarantee you that one of them will be in the bottom 4 of the conference, because that's just how it seems to go in the SEC, and that's life in the SEC. If you're not on every single week, it can spiral from you very quickly. Or if you're on every single week and you're better than expected, I mean, look at Auburn circa 2013, right? That magical year where everything just clicked for them. They made it all the way to the national championship game. Most people probably projected them in this mid-tier in the conference, and look what happened. They made it all the way to the national championship game. So the talent is there for all of these teams, but there's enough question marks to where they really could go either way.
I think that's spot on. This is just how the SEC goes each year. Every single one of these teams that we're going to break down is extremely talented. And there's a case that you could make very easily for them to go over their win total, even to be a threat to get to Atlanta at the end of this season. So without any further commentary, let's get into it. Number 10, as ranked by you, the listener, in the SEC, is the Auburn Tigers. The Auburn Tigers were 6-7 last year 1 under Hugh Freeze. They were 3-5 in conference play. And I wrote in our team preview, guys, if you watched Auburn attempt to throw the forward pass last year, you may be entitled to financial compensation, because they were one of the worst teams in the country, maybe the ugliest team in the country, attempting to pass the ball down the field. Peyton Thorne either had no help or had no wide receivers open. He also really struggled to deliver an accurate ball. And as a result, Auburn finished 124th in the country at just 162 yards passing per game. You talk about trying to set the game back 100 years. Auburn was trying to do it last year offensively, but this year there's a lot to be excited about down on the Plains. You've got a ton of excellent wide receivers. Keandre Lambert-Smith comes over from Penn State. Nittany Lions were certainly sad to see him go. Cam Coleman flips from Texas A&M. The 5-star freshman looks sensational. He dominated the spring game. He's got height, athleticism, explosiveness, you name it. They also really solidified the trenches, both offensively and defensively. This is what you need to win in the league today. I feel like Hugh Freeze, for all of the slights that people might have against him as a head coach, he's come in and has done a remarkable job turning this Auburn program around from, remember the Brian Harsin era, it felt like they were without an identity. They were stuck in the mud. They were going backwards faster than they could walk forwards. Now, Auburn definitely has a trajectory. It's just the question for me of how high is that trajectory compared to everybody else around them?
Yeah, and I really do think this is going to come down to, can they throw the forward pass this year? Because that's really what held them back last year. There was some improvement down the stretch, and you saw, like in the Alabama game, for example, you saw glimpses of what they could be and glimpses of what they were trying to do, but they just never really could put it all together against a talented opponent. I mean, their biggest win last year, I guess, would be the Cal game early in the season, based on the records of the teams that they beat. Like, their only SEC wins, I think, were Mississippi State, Vandy, and Arkansas. None of those teams really turned out to be anything in conference. And I think the defense will be the calling card again. I don't really expect a big step back from the defense. 8 starters back, 5 NFL draft picks last year, but none of them were higher than the 5th round. So I'm not really expecting a huge step back. So, yeah, I'm expecting improvement from Auburn this year, but it's really going to come down to, can they click? Can the wide receivers click quickly and really up that passing game?
The offensive line is so important here. That was the dearth of talent that they had under Harsin. And Freeze went to the portal, high school recruiting. He wanted as many offensive linemen as he could get. Percy Lewis comes in from Mississippi State. He should be the new starting left tackle. Defensively, I mentioned they really beefed up the trenches. Isaiah Rakes comes in from USC. Philip Bliddy comes in from Indiana. And then they add a Gage Keys, who's 3rd on the Kansas Jayhawks in pressures last year off the edge. So Auburn's a supremely talented team. The schedule is interesting because I've talked to multiple people about Auburn, and you talk to some of their insiders, and they're very confident they're going to go over the 7.5 total as set by Vegas right now. Their schedule is very soft on the front end, at least the first 4 games. I don't think Arkansas at home will be all that much of a challenge for War Eagle, but they didn't think New Mexico State was going to be much of a challenge last year either.
There's
So
a
I guess
Mexico team on the schedule this year, Mitch. They gotta watch out for that one at the front.
there is definitely this year they're probably better under Bronco Mendenhall, but last year they were ostensibly the worst team in New Mexico. But then Oklahoma and Georgia before the bye game. You get Missouri out of the bye game, road games against Kentucky. You get Texas A&M, and then you're at Bryant-Denny Stadium later on in the season. That over-under of 7.5, I mean, Vegas does this for a reason. They've got it nailed. Auburn's going to have to pull off an upset either on the road. Maybe you're looking at a game at Mizzou off a bye week, at Kentucky. We don't know what Kentucky's offense is going to be like quite yet. Or maybe you get Texas A&M. You have a kind of a weird bye sandwich where ULM is the game preceding that. So you're going to need at least 1 or 2 upsets to hit that over. But all of that talent and really good coaching tends to be the recipe for success to get to 8-9 wins in the SEC. And Trey, you talked about it. One of these teams is going to end up in the top 4 or 5 in the SEC.
Yeah, and I really do think, what is the conversation about Auburn like this year if they can just take care of business against New Mexico State and hold on and not give up a 4th and 29 on the goal, right? Like, what is the conversation? Then Hugh Freeze is all of a sudden 8-4. We don't know what he would have done in a bowl game, but he's 8-4 with a quarterback. I guess you're higher on Peyton Thorne if he delivers 8 wins after that performance last year. But man, it's just so hard to know what to expect when they just flat out laid a dud down the stretch last year. They reel off 3 straight wins against bad teams and then just lay eggs at home for a whole game against New Mexico State and then in a final drive against Alabama. So yeah, I'm leaning towards the over, but to me, the over means you go 2-1 against Oklahoma, Kentucky, and A&M. If you can find a way to win 2 of those 3, I think you're looking at least 8 wins, and you can use that, especially if you beat Oklahoma and Kentucky, using that as momentum to maybe even get more than that.
I like Auburn to get to 7 wins this year. Again, I feel like circling back to my biggest question mark, it's the quarterback position, right? And you've got a talented quarterback room there on the Plains, but Peyton Thorne is the starter heading into this year. Maybe there's a quick hook. If he's not very good, he's certainly got the weapons around him. The running game should be good. But I do question whether or not they have the quarterback that can, really facilitate this offense enough to where you're pulling off those upsets on the road, or taking care of an Oklahoma and A&M, what have you, later on in the season.
Yeah,
That's
and it's
Auburn.
a true. If I could just add one more thing, it is a true. He's going to have upgraded receiver talent this year. He had an issue with who he had to throw the ball to last year, but it's a true
Yeah.
chicken and egg situation. It's the age old question: is it the quarterback that doesn't have good receivers, or are the receivers bad because of the quarterback? And hopefully, we'll get that answer this year because he certainly will have good receivers.
Auburn's one of those teams that I've got like highlighted, right? Circled, starred. I'm fascinated to see where they end up at the end of 2024. Number 9, a team that is much lower on this list than I think many of us even anticipated. Number 9 is the Oklahoma Sooners. And I can guarantee you that this rating by our listeners is not because of the talent on the roster, but rather the SEC schedule that lays out in front of them. And Garrett, Oklahoma is coming into the SEC with a lot of confidence, a defense that was improved last year. They've got a treasure trove of weapons offensively. They are handing the keys to a new quarterback in Jackson Arnold, but really for me, I think this is an excellent team, a great roster, but it is a meat grinder of a schedule.
Yeah, man, this is really going to be the example of Oklahoma seeing the difference between the SEC and the Big 12, because Oklahoma, I don't think, has gotten that much worse, which is weird to say considering they got rid of, well, not got rid of, but they lost their quarterback, Dylan Gabriel. They're going to be breaking in kind of a new guy. He had some playing time last year, but didn't really do a whole lot. Breaking in new guy, Jackson Arnold, he's crazy talented. He can throw the ball all over the yard, and he's got some really good weapons, really like Nick Anderson, really like a lot of the stuff they got going on out there. You combine that with a relatively experienced defense, especially on the back end, absolute stud and Danny Stutzman. He's a broken linebacker, and it's on the new college football game, and so it's kind of fun to go in there and play some of those drills with Oklahoma because you play with Stutzman and the whole thing is just broken. So he's a great linebacker. It's a great defense. They're going to have a little bit to prove up front, but outside of that, you look at this team and you say, how could they only be 9th? Well, it's really just the schedule. This is one of those teams that'll be a casualty of their schedule. We've seen it happen from time to time. Think even Florida this year, the team might be better than what it actually shows on the field just because they're playing so many tough games. You really break down the schedule. It's a relatively soft open. They get Tulane week 3. They do get to host Tennessee as their first SEC game. Go to Jordan-Hare. That's never easy, but Auburn, we just talked about them, not necessarily going to put up the biggest fight. But, man, after that bye week, it's Texas, South Carolina at Ole Miss. You get, a relative, easy game with Maine. And then you go to at Missouri, and then you finish with Bama and at LSU. I mean, there's not a whole lot of games on there where you say, oh, that's an obvious gimme, right? There's a lot of games on there you say, man, Oklahoma's going to have their work cut out for them if they're going to win this one. And they're going to have to win in the trenches against a bunch of these teams that are going to want to play physical and are going to want to punch you in the face. They have the guys to do it. It's just going to be about if they actually can. A big key here is going to be watching Jackson Arnold and seeing if he can actually step into being the guy, right? We saw what Dylan Gabriel could do last year. You're finally going to have that real nice veteran defense back there for you. Can he, with a little bit of extra help on the defensive side, can he, with, some talent around him, can he actually take that step and mature as a quarterback? He'll have a soft open to do it, but, pretty quick, he's going to be given the keys and they're going to say go. And it's going to be time to step up and win some games in the SEC.
You say soft open. I mean, it's soft against Temple, Houston. It'd be year 1 in a rebuild under Willie Fritz, but then they get Tulane that comes to town. They've almost lost to Tulane before.
Yeah.
Tennessee and at Auburn before that first bowl game. And then, you're off to the races. The only off week that you have is Maine coming to town the first week in November. Arnold's going to have the tools out wide to succeed. Nick Anderson, Deion Burks, who transfers in from Purdue. Although I know he did get in trouble. He got arrested. I haven't seen how that all's played out, but I'm sure it'll be taken care of by the start of football season.
He'll miss a game or something.
But their running back room is talented. The question for me is the offensive line. This is not a new storyline. We've been talking about this all off season long. It's a lot of talent on the offensive line, but they lost 4 or 5 starters from a season ago, either to the draft or the transfer portal. Bill Bedenbaugh is the offensive line coach, one of the best in the country. He's brought in talented pieces, but the question for me is we've seen not just around college football, but even in the SEC, oftentimes it doesn't matter how much talent you have, who your offensive line coach is, and how many skins he has on the wall. A lot of times it's just flat out time that those guys have to gel as a unit in the foxhole together. I don't know if there's any sort of real ramp up period for them to get that experience needed before it's just body blow after body blow. One of the fun things about watching football in the SEC is the pass rush. SEC teams can get after the quarterback. And if Oklahoma can't protect Jackson Arnold, I'm a little bit concerned about their ability to keep him upright, keep that offense humming downfield. The advantage that they do have is Seth Luttrell is taken over as the offensive coordinator, the passing game coordinator. If you're not familiar with him, excellent job back at North Texas running the offense as the head coach. Defense, don't worry about that. But offensively, the guy's a genius, and he knows how to use the tight end as well, which I think will be a versatile weapon for the Sooners this year. You talked about the defense, Garrett. Brings back most of the pieces from that improved unit last year. Danny Stutzman didn't go to the draft, came back for one more year. So the Sooners over under is 7.5. Had folks up in arms, I think, over in Sooner Nation when that first came out. I think that's really, really accurate. I've got Oklahoma going 7-5, 8-4, depending on how games like Ole Miss go. At Missouri, that's a huge one. If they can flip that game and win in Columbia, I think Oklahoma is on pace for a 9, maybe a 10-win season. I think it would be indicative of the season that they've had so far. But for my money, I'm expecting Oklahoma to quote unquote take a step backwards this year from the 10-win season a year ago, mostly just due to the fact that now they're playing equal competition every single week.
Yeah, one thing I want to say in their defense, and specifically in Venable's defense here, it seems like this Oklahoma squad is always up for the challenge. Like, it seems like they don't really get blown out of a lot of games. I know it's happened, but it doesn't seem to really happen. They seem to really rise up and win some games maybe they shouldn't, right? I don't think that they were better than Texas last year. They still found a way to win that one. And so I don't think motivation or any sort of getting up for these games or just getting blasted in the face. I mean, oh my gosh, I can't possibly keep up with these guys. I don't think that's what's going to happen. If there's anybody who's saying like, oh, you're about to find out the SEC is so different. Well, it's true, but Oklahoma's up for it, right? Oklahoma's going to be able to come in and do it. Big thing is just, look, there's only so many games, in a row that you can play against the top of the conference and still come out unscathed, right? There's just going to be too many chances to take, a body blow. And then, okay, maybe you get past Texas, you get past South Carolina. Now you go to Vaught Hemingway over there in Oxford and you take your first L, right? Because, they play a little ball control. They get you with a trick play and something like that, right? It's just such a grueling schedule that I think, they're going to kind of find out the SEC is different. Yeah, that's true. But that's not us saying that they're going to get blown out of the water and, all these different games are going to be, this massive problem for Oklahoma. They'll get, destroyed.
We'll get Trey back. Looks like he might have disconnected, but we'll move on to Texas A&M. The Aggies come in at 8th on our listener poll. And Garrett, the Aggies they're stuck in the middle. The Jimbo Fisher era is over, as tumultuous as controversial as that was. You go from the highs of the top-rated recruiting class of all time to 5-7, and then last year, obviously 7-5. Jimbo doesn't even finish the season with the Aggies. Mike Elko comes in though, formerly the defensive coordinator for Texas A&M, while we were actually there, and fielded some of the best defenses that A&M had seen in a long, long time. Top 25 defenses almost every single year that he was there. Obviously goes up to Duke, turns that program around, has the Blue Devils flying all over the place and winning 8 games in a season. And now the defensive wizard takes over back at Texas A&M. Connor Wegman is healthy, quarterback. You've got a rebuilt offensive line that's probably the biggest question mark on this team, but you have a loaded running back core. Le'Veon Moss, Amari Daniels. You bring in E.J. Smith from Stanford. And then you've obviously got the former 5-star true freshman Reuben Owens there. Wide receiver, kind of a mixed bag. You've got Moose Muhammad, Noah Thomas at return as the incumbent starters. You bring in a number of guys from the portal. I know Cyrus Allen Barber, the receiver from Troy, who ended up getting hurt. Yeah. But Cyrus Allen comes in from Louisiana Tech. Defensively, you're really excited about Nick Scorton, who led the Big Ten in sacks a season ago from Purdue. He's a hometown kid, went to the Big Ten, was told by Jimbo and company, hey, you're not big enough to play the defensive line. Goes to Purdue, shines, and now he's
that was the miss for the staff there in College Station.
Yeah, exactly, right? So you look at Texas A&M, they upgrade the secondary as well. Will Lee comes in, Des Ricks comes in, BJ Allen from UAB, one of the highest graded Pro Football Focus corners a season ago. There's a lot of talent on this A&M team, but Garrett, there's been a lot of talent on this team for the last decade. Kevin Sumlin, Jimbo Fisher, and now Elko takes over in year one. Really, the question is, when do they break through? Can they do it this year? They've got all their tough games at home. That's certainly appealing, but on the other hand, it feels like one or two slip-ups and you're right back to 7-5, 8-4.
Yeah, it's been a really interesting time for A&M the last couple seasons, and I want to point to it specifically because the last couple seasons they've gone down to their third-string quarterback during the season every single time, and so that's not really where you want to be, right? When you go from Haynes King through Max Johnson all the way down to Connor Wigman, who turned out to be pretty good as a true freshman to finish the season a couple years ago. So you turn around, you get excited about Connor Wigman. He showed some good flashes, looked pretty okay. Didn't get any help from his offensive line, so he gets hurt. Now you turn that around, you're back to Johnson. He gets hurt again, and now you're down to Henderson, and then you end up seeing the fourth string in the bowl game because Henderson gets hurt on like the second play. I mean, the Aggies can't catch a break when it comes to injuries at the quarterback position. So this is a really interesting one for me because I wonder what happens if you just let Wigman get a little bit of time, right? What happens when he gets to get into the flow of a season, take a loss, come back, bounce back with a win, right? Put up a big performance, throw a couple picks, and then you got to go put up another big performance, and then you have another little bit of a struggle week. Like, what happens when, over the course of a season if Wigman gets a chance to go? Because he certainly has good top-end talent. Depth is a bit of a concern for the Aggies. I think that you're not particularly loving where you are depth-wise at the receiver position. Definitely don't love your depth at the linebacker position. And offensive line could also be a concern as well. And so, you're really hoping for a healthy season, which, has not particularly been the Aggies' strong suit the last couple of years. But you're hoping for a healthy season to watch that happen. If it all comes together, though, this is a talented enough roster to compete at the top of the conference.
Yeah.
It just, that's a massive if, right? If Mike Elko can get his defensive system back in there, right? When it was working at A&M, when he was there a couple years ago, that defensive system was kind of a clamp down, kind of need the jaws of life to get you out of it type of defense, right? And they really just stopped people and kind of had their way with opposing offenses. We haven't seen good offense in College Station in a while. Even going back through the end of sort of the Kevin Sumlin era, and they had, some of those issues. It's been a long time since we've watched the A&M offense look anything like a modern day offense that, can move the ball up and down the field at will. I really like the new offensive coordinator hire. I really like bringing him in, a guy from Kansas State. I really like that. It's just going to be about how fast can it all click, right? And they don't have any ramp up time. Their first game is Notre Dame. Yes, it's at home. That's a good defense at Notre Dame, and that's a very good offense as well. I think the defense is a much better unit, obviously, but they're going to have to figure out some offensive stuff fast because, they get McNeese, but then they go to Florida. You get a little Bowling Green, and then you go play Arkansas. That game's always heated. You play Missouri at home. That's a very good team. And so there's not a whole lot of ramp-up time if you're the Aggies to find your offense. It's just going to be throw them out there and say, Wigman, you've been here for 2 years, even if you weren't really playing all that much. You got to know how to be a leader and go out there and do that. I think he can do that. It's just going to be about how quick, and then how quickly can he kind of get back in and do what he needs to do to give his defense a chance to win games as well.
Aggies have to start 4-2 to this season if they're going to do anything special, whether that's beating Notre Dame or finding a way to beat Missouri. I don't quite know how it's going to pan out, but yeah, the road trip to Florida will be difficult. Arkansas is always a good game, and then later, LSU comes to Kyle Field. You're at Auburn. You get Texas, obviously, in the season finale. So it's a tough road, but their over/under when we wrote the preview was 8.5. Listen, as a Texas A&M fan, you'd like them to hit that over, right? But we haven't seen that in College Station in a little bit. So my main objective for this first season is just ensure that 8-4 is the floor, right? Nobody's going to fault you for going 8-4 in that first season. Sure, you'd love to beat Texas. You'd love to beat LSU. But if you don't, ensure that those losses don't tarnish the rest of your season, right? A&M is going to be competitive, I think, in every single game, no matter if they win or lose. That Notre Dame game out of the gate, I think is going to be a rock fight. I think that's going to be a 20-17 kind of final, one way or the other. I'd love to see Texas A&M win that game, but Notre Dame's defense is the real deal this year, and they have a dual threat quarterback in Riley Leonard, who I think is going to put that defense to the test immediately. So just go 8-4 in year one, and I think it's a successful campaign for Mike Elko.
Well, and 8-4 has to look a certain way, right? And we talked about this a little bit on one of the shows, I guess a couple weeks ago. We talked about what success looks like for A&M, and I said realistically 8-4, but it looks consistent and it looks normal, and you kind of expect what you're getting. I think is a massive step in the right direction because, good gosh, the last couple seasons have been anything but consistent for the Aggies, right? Yeah. You have seasons where, it's all falling apart and then you beat Bama at home somehow, right? Yeah. Like, how does that happen? That shouldn't happen in college football. And then to go from that to losing to Florida, which was a very bad Florida team later that season. There's just so many ups and downs for the Aggies. And so I said, and I think that this makes sense, and Aggies, feel free to comment on this one, but if you go 8-4 and your losses are, kind of a close one where you looked competitive against Notre Dame, a score fest with Missouri where you just couldn't quite get across the line, close one to LSU, and, you play competitive against Texas, maybe keep that one close and give your fans something to root for. I think that feels like a successful season, right? I think that feels like something you can say, you know what? We're not thrilled about it. We would have rather beat Texas. Obviously, you hate losing to those guys. Yeah, I wanted to get LSU. But I think realistically, if you're able to say, okay, but we took care of business, we beat everybody else on the schedule and handled what we need to, that lets you build for next year. And I think that's something that Aggie fans could look forward to and actually be excited about.
Yeah, going back to, that framing off the top, the swing states, right? Like if you get a Texas A&M or an Oklahoma, who I think a lot of people already anticipate being up towards the top of the conference, but if you get a special run out of one of those teams in Auburn, that changes the whole dynamic of the SEC, right? That throws the conference, at least maybe the back end of the top 5, into utter chaos, right? If Texas A&M is able to beat Texas, maybe that spoils a really special season. We'll just have to see. If Auburn is able to beat Alabama on the road, maybe that kicks them out of the playoff. The SEC is going to be cinema down the stretch, and these teams right here in the middle, I think, are going to provide us with the most drama.
And for none of those teams, do you want to see a situation where they win that game and then they lose in Starkville or something like that? Like none of those teams want to see that. And that's not to shade, Mississippi State, but it's just like if you're the Aggies and you end up beating Texas in the last game of the season, but that comes after losing in Starkville, like you're feeling pretty bad. If you're Oklahoma and you knock off Texas, that's your big rival, or you beat Bama at the end of the season or something like that, but then you drop to South Carolina, you're going to feel bad about that. And you're going to say what are we doing, right? All of these sort of middle tier teams, they want to see a consistent run and then maybe an upset here or there to try to jump up into that top group. Don't give me this, inconsistency, right? Can't quite figure out how to put it all together over the course of the season. I know the SEC will do that, but that's not what those fan bases are looking for.
Well, breaking news, our political correspondent Trey Reeves is back with us. He's rejoined the live feed. So
Got a
Trey,
lot to cover, guys. I'm the political correspondent. There's a lot going on.
that's right. Well, I'm
Phones are
being
ringing off the hook over here.
I'm being told that you're right in the middle of downtown Nashville, where the Tennessee Volunteers have come in 7th on our list. This is certainly much lower than I would have had them. Trey, can you tell us about maybe rioting in the streets? I can't imagine that the Vol Navy is really happy about this ranking. Have they started arming the yachts?
Mitch, they have more than armed the yachts. They're ready for war over here. There's fires burning. There are the Sun Sphere in Knoxville has been toppled over. It's not a pretty scene. But listen, Tennessee, I think when I talk about teams that could make a run and could be in the top 3, could make Atlanta, could find themselves in the college football playoff, I'm really circling this Tennessee Volunteers team because took a step back last year. They had the magic of Hendon Hooker. That season was just ripped away from them in Columbia, South Carolina in 2022. You take a step back with Joe Milton leading the way. I'll be the first one to say that I did not see that coming. I thought that they would just keep on rolling, but Nico Iamaleava running the show, I'm really excited about personally. They got a lot of pieces in the portal. They're supplementing their O-line with Lance Hurd from LSU, Chris Brazzell from Tulane, the wide receiver, a couple of guys to help their secondary as well. And look, the strength of this team, at least on the defensive side of the ball, is the pass rush. Getting guys back, it's one of the scariest pass rushes in the entire country. So if you're telling me that you have a good pass rush and you're going to get plus QB play, which I think they're going to get from Nico, sign me up. I think that's a good recipe for success in any conference and could find themselves in the college football playoff. But they really just didn't lose a lot last year, right? Like Joe Milton, I know they lost Joe Milton, Jalen Wright, a couple of other guys were drafted. They lost a couple of safeties. So they have depth could be an issue on the back end. But again, they've supplemented that in the transfer portal. They did some good work there. And it's really going to come down to, did the 5-star quarterback that Josh Heupel, his first big high-profile high school quarterback recruit at Tennessee, is he the real deal or is he not? Because if he's the real deal, we're going to see Tennessee a lot closer to 2022 than they were in 2023. And they weren't bad in 2023. You guys were talking about teams that lost games they shouldn't, right? Like that loss to Florida, getting blown out by Mizzou, a couple other instances where they just didn't show up. And then a couple other instances where they're leading Alabama at halftime and looking like they're going to run away with that game. And then they let that one slip away in the second half. So this is a good team. I was really impressed with what Nico put on film in the limited action he saw last year. They actually were showing the Citrus Bowl on the SEC network this past weekend. And I stopped playing NCAA 25 to watch it for a little bit because I knew we were going to talk about Nico. And I was really impressed with how he handled that really tough Iowa defense. It's good film. They didn't put up a ton of points, but one of the best defenses in the country. He went toe-to-toe without having a ton of in-game experience. So I'm interested. I'm buying in on Tennessee this year. The schedule sets up really nicely for them that we'll go over in a second, but color me in on Tennessee this year.
Yeah, the pass rush, you highlighted it. They were 9th in the country in sacks last year. James Pierce is back. They add a ton of guys around him. Boo Carter, a 5-star safety, joins the mix. You mentioned Gerard McCoy, who comes over from Oregon State to play cornerback for them. They've got it rolling. Heupel has absolutely got it rolling. I tell you what, if there's a game that is circled on their calendar other than the 3rd Saturday in October, it is September 21st, the SEC opener when Tennessee goes back to Oklahoma. If you don't know that story, Josh Heupel led Oklahoma kind of into their glory years under Bob Stoops back in, 99 and 2000, I believe he was the
won natty. Yeah, won the natty.
Yeah, won the national championship, is on staff early in the 2010s, and ends up getting just absolutely done wrong. Fired in 2014, I believe it was. And from everything that we heard at SEC Media Days, not from Heupel himself, but from the commentators around it, a lot of maybe bad blood, a lot of sour taste still in the mouth, probably of both sides. And wouldn't you know that Heupel would love to storm into Norman and give it back to Oklahoma, start his conference play outright? Because after that, Trey, they get a bye week. They go to Arkansas. They get Florida at home. You figure those are both wins. You get Alabama at home after that as well. And then you get a perfectly placed bye week before you set up for the stretch run. Kentucky, Mississippi State, at Georgia, probably a loss. UTEP and Vanderbilt. I mean, this is one of the more forgiving schedules, even with some tough games on that slate. The bye weeks are perfectly positioned to allow Heupel to get the troops ready to roll.
Yeah, it's weird to say that you got a good schedule when you draw both Alabama and Georgia in the new SEC, but Tennessee's used to that, and Heupel's used to that after spending the time that he's been in Knoxville. So I like the schedule. I like how it sets up. Don't look past that NC State game.
True.
That's a neutral site game in Charlotte. It's going to be, I think whoever wins that game is setting themselves up for a dark horse playoff contender status, because it's going to be a big win for either one. I think it's going to be less surprising if Tennessee wins it, so maybe it's not as big of a deal to the college football masses, but NC State's going to be ready to play in that game. We've talked a lot about MJ Morris, so they've got to be ready to go for that one. But after that, yeah, I think that they're going to be ready. You know that he's circling the Oklahoma game. And the last time that Alabama came to Knoxville, we all know what happened. They left with a loss. So
yeah,
I'm interested to see. But I'm in on Tennessee. I think it's going to be a really fun season. I don't know if it ends in the playoff, but they're going to be a really competitive team.
I agree. They're a top 5 team in the SEC for my money. So a little low here based on our survey results. But, listen, we've been wrong before. I do think 9 wins is the floor for this Tennessee team. Their over-under's 9.5. So I think you've got a pretty good shot at finding a way to go over 10-2. But at worst, I think Heupel's crew is 9-3 and feeling maybe a little bit disappointed, but still a very, very dangerous team, no matter who draws them week in and week out. All right, let's round table this final team. The last team in this section, number 6, is the LSU Tigers. Tigers have a new quarterback this year. They've got new offensive weapons out wide after going 10-3 a season ago. And they were one of the ultimate half teams in college football, right? Jalen Daniels wins the Heisman. He was absolutely impossible to stop, whether through the air or on the ground. He was a human highlight reel waiting to happen. But that defense was so bad that you look up at the end of the year and you go, LSU could have easily lost 2 more games on this schedule minimum, right? They pull out a miracle against Missouri. They were on the ropes late with Texas A&M, and they're able to pull that one out at home in the season finale. I mean, there were multiple cases where I was like, I don't know about LSU. I think it might be a one-man band. That one-man show is off to the NFL. But you've got Garrett Nussmeier, a guy who waited his turn, did not take the easy route and transfer out, a local kid from Flower Mound Marcus here in the Metroplex. So I feel like we know him. We know what he's capable of, but I'll pitch it to you guys. They bring in plenty of weapons out wide, CJ Daniels from Liberty, so they've got talent, but is that defense going to hold them back for a second straight year?
We talked about this. Garrett and I talked about this on a show where we were answering some questions, and one of them was, what is the new defensive staff going to do? Is the LSU defense going to improve under a new defensive coordinator? And I mean, the answer to that really is just it can't be much worse. Like it was probably the worst defense in program history last year. I don't know specifically on that. Maybe an LSU fan could point me to a worse one, but when you talk about the talent on the field and just recent success, that was one of the worst LSU defenses in program history and an embarrassment to the program, quite honestly. So they have the talent. The talent isn't the issue. Maybe it was coaching. I mean, Brian Kelly has had a ton of teams with really salty defenses with less talent than what LSU is going to have this year. So if the defense can take a step up, then they're going to be in the college football playoff. I don't think the offense is going to fall back too far, but it can't possibly get worse. It's just going to be a question of how much better it can get and how quickly.
Yeah, man, I got to say, Brian Kelly was about ready to execute his entire defensive staff after last season. That, you waste his Heisman Trophy quarterback and his 2, top of the draft wide receivers. Like, come on. It's it's a nice little callback, but he's not the guy who's going to stand up for that stuff. And I'm glad because, I think Blake Baker's going to do a good job. He's got to figure out how to put guys in the right position. I mean, the amount of times that I saw Harold Perkins getting muddied up in the middle of something, I'm like, kick him out to the edge and let him just be fast and a freak of athleticism. Like that's what he is. He just is better than you at anything athletic. And so if you let him be speed, if you let him be like kind of physical around the edge, you're going to win a lot of the reps on that side of the ball. You can kind of shut down the run game in one direction if he's coming off the edge. If he gets all muddied up in the middle and you let, kind of a guard, double team and then everybody gets up in there, like it's not going to work out. It's you're not using your players to their best, right? And I think that's the big thing is, LSU is so used to having these top end defenses because they have studs, and that's not different. This year they still have studs. They just were not being put in a good position to win games, and so I think almost kind of like what Trey is saying, you can't really be that much worse. They don't have a whole lot of room below them, especially at the Power 5 level, or I guess Power 4 level. They don't really have a whole lot of room below you to perform worse than you did last year. It's going to be, I think for me, yes, the offense will be good. Yes, there's weapons, but can they be explosive enough to get past some of those tight results like what you're talking about? Right? Even look at the Arkansas game. Arkansas was not very good. They beat them by 3. And you really shouldn't be in that competitive of a game against Arkansas. But if it's, the newer quarterback, yes, he's talented. The new cast of receivers, yes, they're talented. New running back, yes, sure, 100%. But it's not so much about do they have the talent. It's more can they go as high octane as last year's offense? I don't think you can expect them to. So can the defense make up that ground and then some in order for them to ultimately get back to standards? I don't know. I mean, I think the schedule sets up a little bit better for them to kind of get their, get their feet wet and kind of figure out where they want to be and, kind of how they want to play. But there's enough games on this schedule that they could drop a few and really be in trouble. And you could be talking about, Brian Kelly needing to come with some very creative answers besides just getting rid of his entire defensive staff.
It helps that they get, in my opinion, their 3 toughest games at home. They get Ole Miss at home, Alabama at home, and then Oklahoma at home to finish off the regular season. You do have road trips to Texas A&M, to Florida, but that's really, I guess, South Carolina week 3. That USC game. Are you guys? We talked about this in the Big Ten preview. I'm already penciling this in as an LSU win. I mean, USC's trying to get out of the game. Miller Moss is going to be great, but I don't know what that defense is going to look like. I feel like LSU has a very solid start to the year. I feel like they get 5-0 heading into that Ole Miss game off a bye, and then they get the Rebs at home. So it really does set up nicely. Something in me, though, kind of wants to sell that over of I think it's what, 9.5. Yeah. And the betting public's taking the over right now. I it feels like too much going on for me to fully buy in.
It's a lot of turnover and it's a lot of loss of production. Like you're basically losing. You're hoping the defense can improve, and you're losing everything that went right on offense last year. So that's a lot to ask. And Brian Kelly has been masterful in season, but we have seen seasons coming off of big high points. And I would say winning the SEC West and winning a Heisman Trophy with your quarterback are certainly high points. We've seen him have a down year here and there too. So especially at this time in Notre Dame. So I'm fascinated by LSU this year. I really don't know what to think of them. And I think we'll know a lot more after the USC game, because if it's a similar story to the Florida State games that they ultimately ended up losing, where they can't stop an opposing offense and the offense on their side is just not ready for for game time, could be a long season for LSU.
Yeah, I think the USC game could prove to be a little bit of fool's gold. They could come out there and dominate that game, and then it turns out we're just doing a little week 1 overreact. But nonetheless, I still think that 9.5 is a little aggressive. I think there's realistically 4 losable games where you'd say, like, okay, like that's one where if they don't show up, the other team could win that game. I'd pick Ole Miss, A&M, Alabama, and Oklahoma as kind of their 4, like, losable. You don't maybe expect them to lose. I'm not going to pick them to lose each of those, but, I think realistically those are all, on the road at Kyle Field. Obviously, Ole Miss is a good offense. Bama's got, a new look offense, a new look everything. I mean, no Nick Saban, but this is still a very good Alabama team. and then Oklahoma at the end of the season for them to have everything figured out. Oklahoma will have their entire first season under the belt at that point. So I just think you look at this, you say 9.5, where I could see them losing 4. I don't know that I'm comfortable with that number. I think 9-3 feels real competitive to me. 10-2 could happen. It is, again, a very good line. Vegas clearly knows what it's doing. But I think 9.5 feels a little bit aggressive for me.
Getting the bye week before Ole Miss and before hosting Alabama, those are
big.
gifts.
That's big.
Those are gifts from the SEC office, no doubt about it. Well, that'll wrap our part 2 of the SEC preview here on the 3 Tech. What did you think of our swing state predictions? Which teams do you have going up the rankings? Which teams do you have fallen down? Friday morning, we preview our top 5 teams as selected by you, the listener. And for Trey Reeves, Garrett Turney, I'm Mitch Mason. Until Friday morning, so long, everybody.
Gracious him. How about